some of you might be expecting Alexander Kornbrook to stand here in front of you and give you an enlightening talk about the relational database ability. However, unfortunately, he's sick. We have a backup speaker here who's going to tell us something about Stuxnet. He's Candid. Just a quick info besides, if you have any questions, any of our speakers will be glad to answer them at the end of their talk. However, since all the talks are being videotaped, I would ask you to raise your hand if you have a question and wait until I hand you the microphone to ask it. Okay, so
thanks. Hello, everyone can hear me in the back as well? Oh, I see nodding of heads, perfect. So, yeah, as you see, I'm not Alexander Kornbrook. I'm not even trying to impersonate him. We're going to try that. Stay for the next talk. Dale's probably going to tell you how to do that with some suggestions. But, yeah, since I heard 1 hour ago that I should give a stand-in talk on something, I think, okay, maybe Stuxnet would be the most perfect fit. First, I thought, maybe I could go for Christina. Don't know if you guys know her. She's one of the hackers who got arrested for dealing with ZooSpot and stealing, well, $70 million. There's a couple of people arrested with it, but you see, hackers aren't really all those geeky nerds wearing black t-shirts, at least not some of them. But then someone else pointed out, well, probably should talk about the badge as well, because my brother actually designed the badges. Here you see an early design idea when we started, so pretty much stayed actually the same from the beginning, but obviously lots of effort trying to get everything on the display that we wanted, get the patch, the buttons on top there, you see it's actually working. So we ended up printing a couple of hundreds of those motherboards or platines, PCBs. As we said, it's all made in Switzerland by hand. Labor as well, but not Chinese children. So we use our own free time, getting a couple of the ICs. We used free flow, meaning taking that, putting a couple of the platines there, and then use a very smart pick-and-place machine to actually place all the batches in there. Put it in our pizza oven. It's not the real pizza oven, so Pascal was actually wrong in the keynote. We were still able to cook other meals doing that. But yeah, ending up with, I think we're now at 180, 190 batches. And we hope you all enjoy that. If you have any questions about it, feel free to drop down in the Hash Center and we're happy to help you out. But yeah, back to different hardware. So Stuxnet. You've probably all heard of it because it's been all over the news, at least starting in September. There's lots of thought about it. There's even more hype about it. Yeah, I have to admit, I helped doing some of that as well. But I was trying to kind of keep the ball a little low on that because, I mean, you see a couple of the news articles here, and when I was talking to journalists, they all came with the impression, okay, so when is the nuclear power plant in Iran going to blow up? You have any estimate on that? And it's not really that simple, right? And it's really hard to get them off the idea that, yeah, it was that hack of the century that was targeting very special ops and doing it. But we'll come about a couple of those, well, let's say, thought messages that have been spread out. So what is Stuxnet? Well, we've seen 4 variants over the last, let's say, 12 months. They're all 1.5 MBs, so not your little tiny Trojan, because there's lots of code in it. So what else do we have in it? Well, the main purpose is to take over industrial components in some facility. Could be a chocolate keys factory, could be a power plant, yes, okay, could be any, there's so many industry facilities actually using the components that we're going to talk about. So how is it possible to do that? Well, actually, he's trying to control the PLCs, the programmable logic controllers, which are kind of the interfaces to all those fancy robots and other stuff that you might have seen somewhere. So, first of all, he needs to get into the facility. He was using the now famous link vulnerability. So with the USB stick, even if you have patched it up, even if you have auto-run disabled, if you browse it, it will actually use a vulnerability to infect your machine up to Windows 7. It was declared as a zero-day exploit. No, it isn't. It wasn't a zero-day. It was unpatched at the time, true to that. But we actually saw a Zeus bot, not from Katrina, but someone else, back in 2008, using the same vulnerability already. Funny enough, we detected the sample there, but as it is with AV companies, it's just generic signatures dropped off, so we're fine. Microsoft confirmed that it's actually the same vulnerability, but they probably didn't know about it either. So what else did it use? Well, it used the old spreading vulnerability from configure worm. Obviously that one was patched, so definitely not zero-day, but we all know people tend not to patch, especially in those productional areas where you have air-gapped networks where you say, okay, I'm not connecting my machines to the internet, so why the hell should I patch? Because nothing's going to ever enter my network, right? And we all know that's bad by design. There's always going to be something in there. And when I was talking with a couple of large manufacturing places in Central Europe, they all confirmed that most of them actually use thousands of USB keys, and they have external personnel coming in with their own laptop to do some configuration in the internal air-gapped network. So there's no way of controlling that. There won't be anything jumping onto that network. So still legitimate idea to use that vulnerability to pass on. Third one was the printer spool vulnerability. Also needs to spread around in the local network using an exploit in printer spooler. Was deemed as a zero-day. This one definitely wasn't a zero-day. That was already announced in, I think it was April 2009, in the magazine Hacking. I think it's originally a Polish magazine, but it's translated in Chinese, Russian, English, German. So apparently Microsoft isn't reading that magazine because, yeah, it wasn't patched when Stuxnet came out. So from those three vulnerabilities here, all were actually already known, so not really that sophisticated as being told. It also used normal network shares, so using the privilege token that you have on your machine or the infected machine to actually spread around and see if there's any admin shares open, where you can copy itself onto, use a scheduled task to run itself and then infect that machine as well. Obviously, command and control server, we go about that in a minute. Peer-to-peer update, we all know about peer-to-peers, like also being used for quite a while now in malware to update itself. Stuxnet wasn't really as sophisticated as others, like Configure actually used really sophisticated algorithms. You also get the updates encrypted, so they were digitally signed, so you can't really take over the machines. Here, Stuxnet just opens up a couple of RPC ports, and then scanning the whole local network to find if there's any other machine infected with Stuxnet. If there is one, it's connecting there, they're exchanging the version number of it, and the one who wins, the one who has the higher one, just sends it over to the other one. So pretty straightforward. You could take it over as well. The two interesting ones are actually it used two escalation of privilege. To my knowledge, 0 days, meaning I haven't seen that published anywhere, but taking the others that we saw here, it might actually be that they have been known as well. So I wouldn't say that it's definitely their work. So maybe if they bought the others or just were reading the magazine, which you can buy for I think 10 euros at every airport, you can also estimate that they probably bought those vulnerabilities as well. So what else did we have? Well, it was checking for different AV products if they were installed on a machine, and depending on which AV software they found, it's actually injecting into different processes. Checking for think it's actually 9 different brands with about 11 different versions. This is one of the odd parts, because if you know about all the articles in the press, it says highly targeted attack. They really knew what they were going after. They knew everything. So why the hell would you scan for 9 different AVs if you know exactly what's running in that plant, right? So either they didn't really know that much, or they just couldn't get there. So probably they wanted to make sure that every laptop that they infect, which probably belong to a external consultant, will be infected and then brought into their facility that they wanted to infect in the first place. And well, as we all know, hard-coded passwords exist in that environment. Here it's with the Siemens schematics, so with the WinCC and Step 7 software. You're actually using hard-coded password for the database server. If you read the manual, it says don't change it, otherwise it kind of breaks. They actually still say you shouldn't change it, even now. It might definitely break something with the other components, but I'm not a real fan of hard-coded passwords. Guess why? Here it used the database server to actually connect to it, normal SQL server. Used a couple of stored procedures to copy itself over as ASCII, then get itself printed or written to a local file, and then executing as binary. So, pretty sophisticated idea to get itself over. And that's kind of the newer part that we haven't seen that big before. It's also injecting itself into Step 7 project. So Step 7 is the software that you use to program those PLC devices, which I'll show in a minute. So those programmable logic controllers, it's kind of a visual basic approach, if you want. So it's very basic to program it, but you use a normal software tool to do it. And you got a normal program folder with all your project files, and in there it's injecting itself as a DLL, and with the couple of ideas how to name it, actually Step 7 will look for that specific DLL name in the local current working directory first before going to the real directories. So if you have an infected Step 7 project folder, copy it over to a clean machine, start it up there, that machine will be infected as well. So yes, it definitely is complex. It took us quite long, not only us, everyone, to understand the real thing, the real deal behind it. It's sophisticated at some levels, and it's definitely targeted. But I wouldn't call it the hack of the century, definitely not. Some more facts. I was talking about it's using a command and control server. It was using 2 command and control servers, one in Malaysia, one in Denmark with us. To get information back on which machine is infected. So every time it infects one, it's checking if there's internet connection, then sending back, hey, hello master, my public IP is that, my other local IPs are those. I actually see Step 7 software installed, so go ahead, and a couple of other interesting information. Bear in mind, if we talk about air-gapped networks, hopefully those machines wouldn't be able to communicate back. But a lot of machines were actually able to phone back because once we found out about that, beginning of September, end of August, we were able to take over those 2 domains, put on a sinkhole, basically just redirecting all the commands to our site, and by now we have limited more than 100,000 different public IP addresses which we're connecting to that site. So there's a couple of, well, maybe 100,000, maybe a couple of duplicates, but at least a lot more machine than you would expect in one nuclear facility, right? Beside that, one effect which was often overlooked in the media was for the rootkit driver that used to hide itself, hide the files on the USB stick as well. It actually signed them with a valid digital certificate. The first one was from JMicron. That one was revoked on the 14th. Then they switched over to one in Realtek. If you do some Googling and use Google Maps, you figure out those 2 companies actually have a building or share an office compound in Taiwan. so they're door to door. So some people suggested, yeah, probably clear a physical break-in. Someone got there, got both of them. I actually doubt that because, well, do you know where the private key for signing would be on any of those servers if you just walk in for a physical break-in? I'd say it's probably more likely that insider who was paid for it to get it, or just any of your local information stealing Trojan, which just happened to have infected a couple of those machines there and sent back the certificates. So it's hard to really say, but still funny enough that they try to kind of sign it, so it's passing better under the radar of AV and other security tools who think, yes, it's a valid certificate, so can't be anything malicious, right? So let's dive a little bit into what it's actually doing the first time it gets executed. As said, Stuxnet is a 1.5 MB in size DLL. So the DLL itself has a country called by heart, that's what it's too late. I think it's 15 different exports and a couple of different blocks in the resource section, which you can extract to memory and then run from there. But at first beginning, it's checking for its configuration file. So it has a couple of things like, should I infect USB keys? Should I do anything at all? Is that machine interesting? If it passes the check that the configuration file is there, it will actually jump over to check if it's a 64-bit machine. If it isn't, if it is, it will quit. If it isn't, it will go on. So one idea to stay protected would be use 64-bit machines. But we all know in those industrial facilities often we still see NT4, Windows 95, which is really awesome for real-time management of equipment. So after that, it's checking for the OS version. Depending on the OS version, it then goes to check if it's already having admin rights or system rights. If it has not enough privilege, it will use one of those privilege escalation vulnerabilities that we said. There's one for the XP2K and one for the Vista Win7. If it already has it, it's just checking, okay, which AV is installed, chooses a different process. So depending on if Symantec's product is installed, it actually injects in Bing Logon or Explorer. If a Russian one is installed, it's injecting in their process. So just different thing, but the ending after the whole thing even goes is it's running in memory in a different process somewhere injected. So then the second routine kicks in, which checks again if the configuration file is still there, and there's an infection marker. So there's a registry key which will be set, which is set to 19790509. So yes, it looks like a date. I agree on that. Depending on the region of the world that you're coming from, it might be either the 5th of September or 9th of May. It's not my birthday, but it definitely could be someone's birthday. 31 years, right? That could be an average hacker. Someone suggested if you Google it, you find that on the, it was the 9th of May, at that date there was a public execution in Iran of Habib and a couple of other people who were alleged spies from Israel, which led to a couple of unfriendly things happening there. So it could be a message from them, say don't mess with us. Could be just anything. It's really hard to say, right? So that's all speculations, and we probably will never really know. Second thing that we do know, it's checking for a date. So in the configuration file there is a kill date, which at the moment is the 24th of June 2012. Has nothing to do with the Mayan calendar. It's not the end of the world at that date. But you see that it's actually planning quite ahead. So we have 2010, 2012, so still about 9 months to go. So probably a longer operation. Then again, checking for OS, depending on the OS, setting a couple of access control lists, creating a global mutex, so kind of a flag that he knows which state he actually is in, so he can refer if it's already infected or so. writing down a couple of the files to disk so you can load them. Usually they're encrypted, a little encrypted at least, so not too easy to pick up. Checking again on the date, yes, it could have changed, but I doubt that it changed from here to here that much. It's a little over paranoid probably. Then it's decrypting and loading the just written files to disk, checking which version it is, and depending on the version, then checking if it needs to update itself or not. Writing down the rootkit files to hide itself, loading the rootkit files, setting the timestamps of those so they don't show up as 2010, but they actually show up as whenever you installed your system. And then a couple of more mutings as injecting into different other processes to start their own kind of routine. So there's a watchdog, which checks if there is a USB or a removable drive injected into the machine, and if there is one, it will check if it's already infected. If not, it will inject itself into it with the link vulnerability. Then there's another one which will check for if there is Step 7 software installed, and if there's any project files that he's able to inject. So once that's done, the main routine here will exit, but as I said, the watchdog process and all those helper exports will actually still run and wait till there's anything interesting happening. So here's a timeline. I'm aware that it's probably hard to read. It's just copied off the PDF, sorry. Just highlighting that in November 2008, we saw that one of the Zeus Trojans actually used the link vulnerability. In April 2009, the printer spooler vulnerability was publicly printed in a magazine. And the first Stuxnet sample that we have seen is from June 2009. Obviously, you can now ask, well, why the heck did it take you more than a year to come up with that? Or why did the media just start now? Well, to be honest, at that time, we didn't knew it was Stuxnet. At least no one really knew about it. Just, as I said, classified as a generic Trojan horse. Now that we knew what we had to look for, we actually dig back and saw that was an earlier version. The other version, though, was a little different. So it didn't use the zero-day or claimed to be zero-day vulnerabilities. It used a different approach, just your standard autorun.inf file on a USB stick to run it. It had, though, a little interesting tweak. So normally, I hope you're all aware of the autorun.inf file, text file that you place on the USB stick, and if you put it in, it will actually tell the machine which program it should launch automatically, which icon it should address to it, or what the options are for opening it on. And, well, it's a text file, and Microsoft Windows is very, very good, so it's actually parsing anything that's called autorun.inf to the end to see if there's anything that looks like a command for itself to know which thing to open it with. So what they did is they actually used the normal binary executable and just appended the text file at the end of it. And Windows just sees, oh, it's an autorun.inf file, scans all the way down to the appended data section, finds, oh yes, there's text, I can read that, and then sees, oh, the text says I should execute myself the autorun.inf as a .exe file, which Windows is capable of, so it does that, and off you go, you're infected. So it saves you the trouble of having multiple files. Just one file on the USB stick is actually enough to spread the word. So that's one of the interesting ones. In June, Boris Blokada, White Russian AV company, actually first discovered that, hey, there's something fishy going on with the USB stick, so there's link vulnerability. And then it kind of started the whole rolling, so people started seeing, oh, yeah, it's a new, interesting, dangerous vulnerability, should definitely be patched. And then people saw, hey, there's actually some strange blob of compiled code in it, which didn't really match to any normal assembly that you would expect in a malware. So dig a little bit deeper, and then we figure out, oh yeah, it's actually PLC code. So we tried to reverse engineer that to get a little bit of instruction back of what it's actually doing to those PLC devices. And from that, there were lots of kind of tiny bits here and there, which was good for the media because they all wanted to show off something that we found in command and control servers, we found that it's actually using another certificate, and so on and so on. But back to the interesting ones. We started with the hardware, right? So PLCs, programmable logic controllers. Here you see one machine from Siemens on the left side, and on the right side you see a step 7 code snippet. So you got some standard, easy mnemonics to do some coding. But just to give you a 60 seconds briefing on PLC. PLC devices, they do monitor input and output values. So basically, you could use home automation systems to figure out if you should turn on the heating automatically at night, or if you switch on the light, you, I don't know, want to switch on the stereo as well. So just any input and any output can be connected in a kind of logical state machine sense. It's not really difficult, so it's pretty easy. You can do some complicated things with it, depending on how much you spend on those models. They're actually quite sophisticated, and one of the things, obviously, they're planned for real time. So the idea is that you connect it, usually now with Profinet or Profibus, their own kind of real-time Ethernet, and then you can send messages to manufacturing robots or whatever. Stuxnet specifically targets 2 of those components, the S7-300 and the S7-400 series. More specifically, the 315-2 and the I have to look it up, it's on the next slide. So just 2 specific models of the Siemens machines were targeted. Is it difficult to get those? No, you can buy them off the internet, actually pretty cheap. You can get one here for $400. If you spend another $100, you get an official licensed Step 7 software. You can get example programs. It took us maybe a day or so to get something going, so it's not too difficult. We have a slide later on with the equipment that we have in the lab. Obviously, we don't really have that lying around, so we had to organize that as well. But for the Virus Building Conference a couple of weeks ago, we actually just did a small demonstration on how to use it to put some air into a balloon and boost it up. And then the idea was to show that if it's infected, you could actually make it run the pump instead of 5 seconds, 50 seconds, which will blow up the balloon. It was pretty funny at that time. Obviously, all the tweets afterwards were saying, okay, so now we know Stuxnet is dangerous to balloons. Yeah. But what it's really after is, well, still a secret. All we know is it's attacking those specific ones, so it's the 315-2 and the 417. And first of all, before it's infecting it, it's checking the SDB blocks. It's kind of the system data block, which is holding some of the configuration data on it. So it's parsing those blocks, looking for a specific magic byte string code at 50 hex. So if it's there at that location, then it will proceed. If not, you're free. There's nothing happening to your machines. It has to have the specific network card for the Profibus, so only then it's actually injecting it. And then it's counting the occurrences of 7050 and 9500. Those words will be counted in the system data block, and only if there are more than 33 of those values found, it will infect the machine. So obviously, we don't really know what those machines are, because that's not really telling us much. All we know is that they knew what they were after. That's clear. So they knew what actually was in those machines, at least good enough to specifically know what would be in configuration blocks, and probably also know a little bit on how common those configuration blocks would be. Also, what they did know is kind of how the PLCs works. As I said, just buy one from eBay or wherever and figure it out yourself. It's not too difficult. But the 2 interesting blocks beside the system data block is the OB1 and the OB35. OB1 is kind of your main routine. So whatever you have in there will be executed. And Stuxnet, as we just assume, just puts itself into the beginning of the OB1 and then runs first. So like a classic pre-appending virus. OB35 is a kind of watchdog process, so it's every, by default, 100 milliseconds kind of checks if something is happening. And that's allowing it to actually respond to some changes pretty quick and does some action on it. It's also capable of intercepting messages from the Profibus. So if the messages pass around, it can read those and inject itself or create new messages which will be passed on the network to other devices. So potentially, you could actually direct other machines on the network as well, which are infected by Stuxnet. Interesting enough, we kind of used, which was then dubbed a rootkit for PLC devices. Basically means if you have the step 7 software on your machine, and on the right you see the PLC device, all the communication is done by a DLL provided by Siemens. So what Stuxnet does, it copies the real one here with a different name, places itself there, provides the same export functions for the DLL, and for most of it, it's just pushing it back to the real DLL and say, hey, let's you do the job. But for read and writes to the PLC device, it's actually taking itself into account. Which means that if you write something to it, it will modify the thing that you write to have the Stuxnet infection. So if you write something to the OB35 block, it will actually add itself to it. If you read it from the device stack, it will remove itself and show you just a clean version of it. So if you have an infected laptop and you're checking the PLC device, you won't see that it was tampered with. Which made it a little harder to actually identify those infected devices, because you can't really just take all of them offline and say, yeah, let's do a scan manually on each of them. I mean, there's thousands of them, and usually those facilities, well, if they are not online, up and running, you're losing money. So I've been told a couple of those per minutes that it's not up and running, you actually lose 5 grand. 5,000. So pretty fast in scanning all those, not too easy. What does it inject into or to it? Well, here you see different blocks. Think of it as a fine state machine. All the white blocks are malicious ones injected by Stuxnet. The yellow ones are kind of coding blocks, which are used by the official Siemens as well. Green blocks are a couple of data blocks which are used. So we know now what it's doing with the input, and it's generating different outputs. Meaning it's changing some values that it's reflecting back to the NCC, which is kind of the control dashboard, where the operator usually sees all the green flags and the gouges and the meters saying, yes, you're all up and fine running. We can't really tell what's it doing because we don't really know which machine it's targeting. If that is a waste disposal machine somewhere, it will have a completely different effect than a nuclear facility or a chocolate factory. So depending on the inputs and the outputs that it's generating here, obviously it can do a lot of harm or just be a nuisance. So here's a picture of the PLC that we were playing in our lab. So now going back to the kind of speculations of who was targeted. Why does everyone pick on Iran for that one? Well, when we took over the command and control servers and saw, okay, from where do actually the IP addresses ping back to the master server, about 60% of all the infected machines were located in Iran. So could be that other countries are also infected, but their machines don't really talk to the internet. As I said, usually those are firewall or even air-gapped. But it could be that the first kind of infection path was there. But do bear in mind, we were talking here about July 2010. And as I told you, the first version was discovered, or at least in the wild, 1 year ago. So 12 months ago, the first version could have been anywhere. You don't really know. I mean, maybe it's just a smoking gun here, maybe it's a distraction, maybe they thought, okay, all the harm is done, let's infect a couple of other machines to get the attention there, so they won't look here. The drop that you see here is just that they kind of shut down the connection back, well, going out of the country. Some countries can do that, not every country, of course. If you see a little bit closer or look at the distribution, you see Iran, definitely most of the infection, India, Indonesia as well. There have been a couple of infections in Switzerland as well. I checked the IP addresses, actually most of them are ADSL modems at home, and I have no clue if they're running a nuclear reactor in the basement or if it's just some home automation systems. Or how they actually get infected is still a miracle to me. But let's go back to the speculation. So, one of the rootkit drivers had actually still the debugging path in it. So, string here, merges, source, opt3, whatever, Guava. First thing to point out is that if it's a really sophisticated, let's say, government threat intel operation, why the heck would you leave that in? I mean, the QA guy who reviewed that should clearly get fired, right? I mean, that's definitely leaking information. Unless, obviously, it's just a wrong track to get you on some different ideas. But if you Google it up, as everyone probably should do with those words, you check for Myrtus. It's, I think, a class of plants, and Guava is a specific plant in that classification tree. So maybe it's a 31-year-old biologist who has some spare time. Others go a little bit more sinister on it. They say Myrtus, that's Hebrew for the Queen Esther, I think it is. Queen Esther's name from the Old Testament. She was leading their people out of misery and so on. So clear indication that was Israel, just showing with the finger saying, hey, don't mess with us. We know where your pieces are. It could be also that it's actually an acronym for my RTUs. RTU is in the SCADA environment or in PLC devices often used for remote terminal units. So my RTUs actually makes sense. I have no freaking clue what Guava that would mean, but maybe it is biologist. It could also be that it's the first name of the guys creating it, right? But that maybe it's Miriam Tuzlovsky or anything, but who knows? We probably never will know. I speculate that it's rather a wrong track, a red herring, than actually some finger pointing saying, hey, we're capable of doing it. Or maybe it's just because they got the exploit somewhere and didn't really know how to check it, just integrated it. Or the guy who was outsourced for doing the integration and didn't really care about it. We're talking about the birthday mark there at the infection marker. Hard to really say what's it with it. It definitely could be a birthday, but I'd say probably somewhere there is a creator of that worm actually laughing now saying, you all fall for that, I can't believe it. With the PLC devices, it's actually also writing a specific value into one of the data blocks. So it's kind of an internal counter. After that counter is reached, it kind of does nothing, which probably means that it's expecting that the device isn't capable of doing anything, or probably doesn't exist anymore. It's kind of a final state, and they named it that fool or foot, depending on how you spell with the elite hacker slang. If you Google it up, that foot means actually that engine in aviation. So if you're flying with a airplane and you got two engines and one's dying down, you got a dead foot, which probably will crash down. I haven't seen any Stuxnet infections on airplanes, so maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe it's a telltale for 007 or 007, so definitely a spy, secret agent, right? We probably will really never know who was behind it. So all we know is there's lots of speculation. All the people say it was really sophisticated, but if you really look at it, we've seen malware which was far more sophisticated. in terms of what it actually used, how it's using public key infrastructure to get itself signed, how it's using update mechanisms with a little bit more randomization in it. I mean, here, just two command and control servers, which were easily taken over. That's not really redundant, right? Maybe they didn't care because they knew they were stealth enough to go wherever they wanted to, in fact. Maybe their whole plan actually already achieved earlier stages, which we probably never know. The only thing that we know is they also, forgot to tell that, sent back information on the affected machines if it found any of the schematics of the network layout of the PLC devices. So kind of your blueprints of where you put which PLC device, who connected to what. Those were actually sent back to the command and control server as well, which would allow the attacker obviously to kind of adjust its attack and say, okay, so now I know exactly which machines they're using, now I can specifically target those. But you would still need to have someone being able to get there. So if you broaden up the speculations, the nuclear power plant in Bushehr, Iran, has been in many pictures, in many newspapers. Siemens stated correctly that they don't sell any software and equipment to them because it's prohibited. We all know they do actually run Siemens software. There's a couple of nice screenshots, one showing that there's a pop-up message saying your Step 7 software license expired. So maybe they actually don't really use a licensed version. Could be. I guess Siemens won't send anyone down there to collect the money, but you never know. Second on, the Series 300 and Series 400 PLC devices aren't registered or aren't allowed in nuclear power plants. So they're not, certified to use in power plant. Again, some countries might not really care about certifications, right? But I really doubt that someone tried to blow up the Bushehr nuclear power plant, especially not some of the countries around it, because if you blow up a nuclear power plant and you live just right next door, it's not the smartest idea, right? More likely would be the facility in Natanz, also Iran, which was used for enrichment of uranium. So using yellow cake and stuff to get uranium ready for the power plants, which you can use also obviously to create weapons of mass destruction, but that's why it was kind of highly overlooked by external people. And if you look, there's a nice correlation on the output level. So you find nice graphs of how much uranium was enriched to a certain level, above 5% purity, to the degree of June 2009. It actually was still increasing a little bit of the output, so their centrifuges were getting better and better, and then it dropped down, and since then it actually declined down. So it looks like they screwed something up, or maybe they already had enough enrichment, so they didn't really care. But that could be because those centrifuges are actually not so, or are very delicate. So if you screw up a little bit the turning on those, the ball bearings and everything will go nuts in days, and replacing those aren't so easy because some of the equipment there is coming from America. So there's a company in Philadelphia which actually sold the equipment to Natanz and other facilities, which obviously isn't the smartest thing to do in the US because it's forbidden as well. And since they found out those guys are actually wearing, I think, orange jumpsuits and have a little travel restriction. But obviously from there someone could get some intel on what machines are actually in those power plants or enrichment facilities. So that would be a plausible idea. Still, it's all up for speculations. So, last slide. Is it really so uncommon, those target attacks? No, it definitely isn't. I mean, there's been plenty of attacks. There's been Aurora attack at the beginning of the year. We've seen target attacks against military. And we actually did a survey this year asking, I think, 1,500 critical infrastructure providers, do you see specifically targeted attacks against you, which you expect, that they're probably politically motivated or whatever? And 53% of them said, yes, we do. And the average is about 2 attacks per year. So 2 per year is what they actually detect and see. I don't want to know how much they actually don't see and don't detect. Because the typical directed attack that we see is just going for less than 5 persons. So usually it's the CEO, the secretary of the CEO, because she's reading the emails, and then maybe 2 or 3 other key persons, which will get a PDF with a zero-day exploit or a PowerPoint presentation with specific content which is relevant to them. They will open it up, will connect back to get a backdoor, get all the information that they want, and send it off. So here, with more than 100,000 infected machines, it's kind of spread a little bit too far for a really targeted attack. And with that, I'll open it up for questions. As said, please raise your hand and wait for the microphone.
You make cool badges, by the way. But the question is, you got information from over 100,000 affected machines. We also know how many of those were running Siemens software and how many of those fit all the requirements, like the Profinet.
Good question. Yes, we know how many of those were actually using step 7 because it's one of the attributes that it's setting back if it sees step 7 installed. Obviously, not all of them. It's about, I'd say, 15% of it had that installed. How many of those were actually connected to the real deal, the real devices, we don't really know. And how many of those would have the right configuration set with the right values, we don't know. The official statement from Siemens is, I think at the moment, that 17 facilities or enterprises have been infected that use that specific product, but none of them has been affected. Obviously. Does that answer your question?
Do we have any more questions? There's like 2 minutes left.
So how can such attacks be prevented in the future? Is it clever to run Windows in such a system?
Yeah, well, I guess we all know the answer to that. It's pretty tough to actually prevent it. I mean, we went to a couple of those facilities and said, yeah, cool, we can help you, just show the layout and we figure out something. But as I said, some of them actually have hundreds of external guys coming with their own laptop, plugging it into the PLC directly to configure it. They don't want to give away their Step 7 project files and everything, because it's their kind of trademark and CI. So they don't really want to use a USB stick with another machine which is perfectly safe connected. So as long as that process is still the same, there's always going to be someone which has an unsecure laptop which would be able to bring something in. So you would need to actually have those devices kind of locked down. We've tried that, it's actually working. Obviously not using AV software because you want to be in real time, but there's whitelisting or application policies where you can really restrict it and say, I only want those 2-3 processors being run on that machine. No other binary should be able to execute. You can do that pretty fast, even on Windows with the kernel module. Should you use embedded systems, Linux? Might help, but we all know Linux, well, there's bugs there as well, and you're able to infect it as well. So there is no silver bullet to prevent that from happening in the future. But I think now it's starting to get in the right attention area where people say, hey, okay, maybe just making an air gap to that network isn't enough anymore. We really need to protect those machines. Does that answer your question?
It's time for one last question, maybe? Somebody needs to ask one?
Over,
yeah.
your choice. Wait for the microphone, please.
Okay. So, I guess for Siemens this field was a little bit new, especially public exposure and also the collaboration with companies like you. Can you a little bit disclose if and how you interacted with Siemens? I've seen some interesting slides yesterday being published, which are, yeah, disclosing the Siemens view on the story, but maybe you have some more insights.
I could, but I prefer to do it over coffee when the cameras are rolling. Yes, you're right. It's definitely, I assume from my perspective, a little new experience for them. It was not too easy to engage with them. I'd say that's fair enough to say. But yeah, I'll better refrain from going deeper into the details. Sorry for that.
So if there's any more questions coming up, you'll be around to answer them as well. Thanks to Candid for jumping in on short notice.